Traveling, one of the toughest violations to be consistent on. It has many different components in the rule, making it a complex understanding for some. Additionally, we added the 0-1-2 step, which matches the NBA's allowance for steps while gathering the ball or after gathering of the ball. We'll make this rule a little bit more in-depth and require more explanation. It's going to be broken down with looking at the definition of a travel, then the component of falling down, which tends to be misunderstood by coaches and players on why it is not a travel. Then we have the pivot component, and then the final two components of whether you caught the ball in motion or you caught the ball stationary. The definition is pretty straightforward. Pretty much any movement outside the limits or what is outlined in this article is a travel. And clearly you need to have a ball in your hands to have a travel, so that's why it says live ball on the playing court. The first special situation we're going to look at is when a player falls, lies down, or sits on the floor. The most common one we see is when a player dives for a loose ball, and while they grab the loose ball, their momentum slides them across the floor. This is a perfectly legal play. They are not actively crawling on the ground. The momentum of the dive caused them to slide. Perfectly legal. Another situation that we don't see often is a player losing their balance and falling to the ground. Now, your first instinct is to say their pivot foot is lifted, so it's got to be a travel. However, these rules allow for that if a player falls, whether they had both feet on the ground or not, while they have the ball in their hands, it is not a travel until they attempt to stand up or roll away from the defense. Now, it's important to note that it says attempting to stand up while holding the ball. If you are sitting on the ground, lying on the ground, and you start your dribble and get up, that is perfectly fine. It's only when you get up while you're holding the ball that we have a travel. To summarize, if you're falling, lying, or sitting on the floor, legal play. It's only when you avoid the defense by rolling or standing up while holding the ball, we have a violation. Also important to note that there are FIBA interpretations, which is different scenarios that tell you what the interpretation should be. So whether it should be a foul, a violation, or a no call. These are just there to help guide you and help better understand the rules and provide them in a context of situations you might come across. So if we look at 25.5, it talks about a player that's in the act of shooting and commits a travel violation after a foul is being called. So a player gathers towards the hoop, foul occurs, then they travel, they make the basket. You do not count the basket, they go to the line to shoot two. So we still shoot our shots, but because they violated to score that basket does not count. The next special situation is when a teammate lifts up another teammate to play the ball. So whether that's for a dunk attempt, helping to grab a rebound, helping to tip the jump ball, any scenario where you try to boost up your teammate, that is a violation. You can't do that. So you go and do the classic, I'm going to tie my shoes and my teammate's going to run off my back to try and dunk it. That is a violation. This last special situation tends to happen more than the previous two, and this is what happens on shots and drives when both players have their hands on the ball. Now these are two opponents, so if I'm taking a jumper or I'm going for a layup and the defender puts their hand on the ball and we go all the way up and all the way down with both of us having hands on the ball, then it's a jump ball because there's no possession. Both players have their hands on the ball, it is a jump ball. Now the only situation it becomes a travel is if I go and I take that gather to shoot, and on my way down, the player on defense releases their hand from the ball, and I land without getting rid of that ball, it's a travel. To summarize, on the gather, both players have their hands on the ball from the start of the jump to the end of the jump ball. Both players have their hands on the ball from the start of the jump, and the defender takes their hand off from anywhere from after the start of the jump to the end of the jump, it's a travel. Now, if the offensive player, of course, releases the ball before they land, they avoid the travel. But this is in the scenario where the offensive player does not let the ball leave their hands. The pivot foot is what sticks to the ground. So it's kind of nailed into the ground that allows you to move in a 360-degree pattern, but not moving from the spot. So what that means is your pivot foot is down it's on the ground, and your other foot can move freely, stepping at different spots in a 360-degree circle. You can't move from the spot you're in, but allows you to pivot around so you can see different angles and work your triple threat position. So it's just the foot that remains in contact with the floor. That means it can't slide, it can't step, it can't be lifted up. Your heel can come off to pivot, or your toes can come up to pivot, but the full foot can't come up. Now this is the most detailed portion of traveling, so we're going to break it up into stationary and progressing, or moving when you catch the ball. That's when the 0-1-2 comes into effect. But to break it up, we have the stationary. So when it talks about a player standing with both feet on the floor, that could be either just standing there catching the ball, or hopping, landing, catching the ball. And the reason I mention the hop landing is because some coaches teach a hop before the catch, so that way a player can use either pivot foot or they can catch and go into a rhythm shot. So that's more for a balance situation. So when both feet are on the floor, you get to choose whatever pivot foot you want. How you initiate that choosing is by lifting one foot and the other one becomes your pivot point. So that one must stay in contact with the ground. The other type of footwork on a catch is a 1-2, either a left-right or right-left. And how that works is the person catches the ball after the first foot was initiated or placed on the ground. So left foot comes down, I catch the ball, now my right foot comes down. So my pivot foot is the left foot because it's the first one in contact with the ground on the catch. Of course, if you go left, right, and then catch the ball, either foot can work because both feet were on the ground prior to the catch. So if one foot's on the ground prior to a catch, that is your pivot foot. The last thing we're going to look at is the triple threat out of a pivot on a stationary catch. Your triple threat are the three ways you can lift your pivot foot off the ground. So the first one is a dribble. When the ball leaves your hands, then you're allowed to lift the pivot foot. If you lift the pivot foot prior to allowing the ball to be released from your hands, it is a travel. When we look at passing or shooting, you can leave your pivot foot, so you can jump to make a pass or jump to go for a shot. However, that ball has to leave your hands before you return to the floor. So if you jump for a shot, don't like the look, and you land, travel. If you jump, can't make a pass to a teammate and land, travel. However, if the ball leaves your hands on the jump pass or on a shot, there is no travel. Now we're going to look at progressing and how that affects your pivot foot. Progression, in other words, is just moving. So when you catch the ball when the player is progressing, or upon completion of a dribble, there's different factors that could occur that determines what your pivot foot is. 8 different scenarios are listed. However, 3 of them we've already talked about. So we're going to focus on the other 5 that we haven't. On one foot, or both feet touch the floor after gaining control of the ball. So as soon as that first foot comes down, you catch the ball and you gain control of that ball, that is your 0 step. The step after will be your pivot foot. So the first step comes after the 0 step, and that is your pivot foot. When you receive the ball when you are progressing, you're allowed to take the 0 step and the first step before you have to dribble. You're allowed the 0-1. Then, before the second foot comes down, the dribble must be initiated by the ball leaving the hands. If you take that second step before taking that dribble, it is a travel. So you're allowed the 0-1, then ball goes down, then you're allowed your second step. Now this is a movement category, so when you catch and you want to initiate a dribble, the dribble has to be initiated before the second step. If you're coming to a stop, you can take your gather step and your 1-2, and your pivot foot would be your first step. And then in order for you to move into a dribble after coming to a stop, the dribble has to be initiated before your pivot foot, which is your first step, is picked up. This one's pretty straightforward, just saying that the second step occurs after the first step. Whether you go 0-1-2 or gather step, first step, second step, or you land at the same time with your feet. So you take your gather and you land 1-2. It just says the second step follows. The next situation looks at hop steps, or otherwise known as jump stops. If you take your gather step, which is the 0 step, and you jump and land on both feet, you can choose either foot as your pivot. It could be either one. Whatever one you lift up, the other one becomes the pivot. If you take a 0 step and then your first step and then jump and land on both feet for the second step, you cannot pivot with either foot. You are stuck. This is your one step. If you lift one foot or take off from both feet, then the ball has to be released from your hands before you can come to the ground. If the ball is not released from the hands, it is a travel. The last scenario rarely happens, and that's where a player cannot touch the floor consecutively with the same foot or with both feet. So that would be doing 2 hop steps in a row or 2 jump stops in a row. You might see that at the youth level where they're trying to gain balance and they do 2 bunny hops. That's a travel. Or someone doing the same foot twice. So either left left or right right. Your steps always have to alternate, either right left right or left right left, or you can go left into 2 feet, right into 2 feet. But you can't go left left right, right right left, or any combination that has either foot landing consecutively. Advantage-disadvantage situations don't really come into play in traveling because it's pretty blatant when it occurs, and there's very few times you shouldn't call a travel. So Kobe's left foot slides in this clip, and the referee doesn't call it. On this clip, it's the same left foot sliding. It actually slides further away from the basket. So if anything, he's going a little bit more disadvantaged, and it's not something you need to call. It's a minor thing. We don't need to interrupt the game for this minor inconvenience. The only time you'll see a lot of advantage disadvantage in traveling is with little kids basketball, because they travel and carry the ball so much that they won't even be able to play if you call every infraction. In this case, you can see that he definitely travels and he gets a huge advantage because he now gets to score the ball. He made the layup. In this case, there's slight shuffling of the feet, but gains a huge advantage, which ends up in being a foul. And as you can see through most of these clips, unless it's a slight movement of the feet on the perimeter where nothing's really going on, you have to call the travel. Because every time here, so this guy isn't on the perimeter, he's gaining a huge advantage being able to switch his feet constantly. Perkins steps maybe 8 times in this play, and so those have to be called even though they're minor. Remember, if it's like the Kobe clips where it's very subtle movement of the pivot foot, you can pass on, doesn't mean you should. But in most cases, you gotta call the travel. It's a huge advantage.